Thank you so much. At the outset, I must thank Professor Sareen, Dr. Chagan, and Dr. Anirudh for inviting me to give this talk in such an important meeting. And I was really privileged to share dais with such eminent speakers who have spoken before me, and especially Professor Tom Lisnen, who has made my work easy because he's already discussed a lot about the coagulation cascade in patients with acute liver failure. Dr. Lisman did mention about this paper, and to put things into perspective, why this talk is important. What is the risk of bleeding in patients with acute liver failure? In this elegant study of 1,770 patients with acute liver failure, the risk of bleeding complications was just 11%, and majority of them were actually mild and did not require any blood transfusion. So in fact, almost 85% of the patients had bleeding from upper GI tract, which rarely required a blood transfusion. Although 13% of the patients required intracranial pressure monitoring system insertion, the risk of bleeding even in those patients was low, and it was rarely a cause of death in majority of the patients. Only 10 out of 1,770 patients died because of the bleeding, and almost half of them had died because of the ICP monitoring insertion system. So patients who have acute liver failure and develop bleeding complications, this bleeding actually is more of a reflection of severe systemic inflammation rather than of a coagulation cascade. This has again been discussed previously, so I'll skip this. What is the rebalanced hemostasis in patients with acute liver failure? You have both changes in the procoagulant and the anticoagulant systems, which gives rise to a rebalanced hemostasis. So on one hand, you have reduced procoagulant factors, but you also have increase in the factor VIII and reduced anticoagulant factors. In the fibrinolytic pathway, you have increased TPA, reduced TAFI, and reduced antiplasmin, contributing to anticoagulation. On the other hand, you have increased PI1, which is more than compensating for the increase in TPA and the reduced plasminogen, contributing to coagulation. In the fibrinogen pathway, the dysfibrinogenemia contributes to anticoagulation, whereas the increased microparticles contribute to the coagulation. And platelets have also been extensively discussed by the previous speakers. So you have platelet dysfunction and thrombocytopenia contributing to anticoagulation, and the increased von Willebrand factor and reduced Adams 13 contributing to the coagulation. Then, if it is so rare and you have rebalanced hemostasis, why are we discussing the indications for transfusion? And this is the paper which actually highlighted the problems in clinical practice. In this study, almost 80% of the patients had an INR between 1.5 to 5, and more than half of the patients had a platelet count of more than 90,000. And in this group of patients, 91.8% received fresh frozen plasma. The GI bleeding was there in 6.6%, but the INR was not different in patients who had bleeding and who did not. And this low bleeding was despite almost 14.4% of patients receiving ICP transducers. And in fact, patients who had ICP monitors had a lower INR admission as compared to those who did not get the ICP. So they concluded that the practice of giving fresh frozen plasma was futile in majority of the patients. It did not predict bleeding, and it did not prevent bleeding, nor did it help in the outcomes of survival. So we know that INR does not reflect the coagulation status in patients with liver diseases, especially in acute liver failure. And therefore, prophylactic routine use of these clotting factors or platelets or FFP or recombinant factor 7 is not beneficial to the patient, but is actually potentially harmful. And how is it harmful? It can contribute to TRALI. It can cause TACO, that is volume overload, which can then worsen the hepatic encephalopathy. You may get transfusion reactions like febrile non-hemolytic transfusion reactions, which can contribute to worsening of the intracranial hypertension. And now we also know that one of the mechanisms of acceleration of liver failure is the formation of microthrombi. And these microthrombi may be formed because of the excessive transfusions, especially platelets, which can trigger the formation of these microthrombi. Another new mechanism, which has been recently described this month, where the full paper is still awaited, is a mechanism of fibrin deposition in the injured liver, which does not depend on the traditional hemostatic mechanisms. In fact, not only the deposition, but the cross-linkage also does not require fibrin polymerization, and therefore a novel mechanism of this fibrin deposition and cross-linkage appears to be present in the injured liver, and we are waiting for the details of the paper. Another interesting concept is the role of microparticles in patients with acute liver failure. It has been known for quite some time now that patients who have a higher microparticles have a lower transplant-free survival. And this prediction increases on day 3 as compared to day 1. So what is the mechanism of this microparticle-mediated injury in acute liver failure? It is known that these microparticles are associated with a higher grade of hepatic encephalopathy as well as the degree of SIRS. And the mechanism for this is the stimulation of the neutrophils, causing a neutrophil burst in response to microparticles in patients with acute liver failure. These microparticles are not only stimulant to cause the neutrophil burst, but they are themselves highly procoagulant. And when you give apheresed platelets, which are stored, they do accumulate these platelet MPs over a period of time, which does increase as the number of days for which these platelets are stored. So if you have stored for day 5, the number of MPs which will be present will be much higher as compared to if you have used 1-day-old platelets. Especially this is true when you have CD42B, which is one of the main mediators of this procoagulant pathway. Expression is much higher as the storage of platelet increases. And this may contribute to SIRS and or Charlie. What do the ALF EASL guidelines tell? The routine use of FFP and other coagulation factors is not supported and should be limited to specific situations such as insertion of ICP monitors or active bleeding. The target of hemoglobin for transfusion is 7 grams. And this insertion of ICP monitors, the infusion of FFP cryoprecipitated platelets should be done depending on the initial assessment of coagulation, usually guided by viscoelastic techniques like TEG or ROTEM. In patients who have significant active hemorrhage, we need to correct the coagulation and thrombocytopenia, as well as identify and apply local measures to deal with the source of bleeding. It is a very common practice in some of the Western countries to give prophylactic recombinant factor 7A prior to insertion of ICP monitors, but there is no evidence of decreased mortality with such a practice. But actually, there is a potential significant risk of thrombosis when you give recombinant factor 7A. This was a very interesting thing which I read. The European Journal of Anesthesia guidelines tell that moderately elevated INR should not be corrected before any invasive procedures in patients with acute liver failure, with the exception of intracranial pressure monitor insertion. The target plasma fibrinogen levels should be 1.5 to 2 grams per liter in both hemorrhage as well as in patients where ICP monitor insertion is being done. And this can be achieved with using a fibrinogen concentrate where it is available at an initial dosage of 25 to 50 mg per kg body weight, and try to maintain a platelet count of above 60,000. If there is a lab or clinical evidence of accelerated fibrinolysis, then tranexamic acid should be considered. Although the AASLD recommendations are pretty old, but some of the things are interesting. In the absence of bleeding, they have extrapolated the recommendation to initiate platelet transfusion from the data on non-ALF patients to a threshold of 10,000, whereas some experts differ and mention the threshold to be 15 to 20,000, especially in patients with infection or sepsis. Prior to invasive procedures, a platelet count of 50 to 70,000 has been considered adequate. Although if you look at TEC correlation, the platelet count of 100,000 appears to be more appropriate. If a patient has bleeding and the platelet count is below 50,000, these patients should generally be transfused with platelets provided no contraindication such as TTP or HIT exists. Now, what are the drivers which will tilt the rebalanced hemostasis towards bleeding and where you will have a lower threshold to give correction of the coagulation? So one of this is acute kidney injury. In this excellent paper published recently, patients who had AKI3 had worse parameters on thromboelastography. The R time, K time, and the alpha angle were all worse in patients with AKI3 as compared to AKI0. However, their MA were similar. Very interestingly, even if you do a heparinase TEG, this difference persists. And if you look at the endogenous thrombin potentials, they are much lower in patients with AKI. But if you look at the resistance to PROTAC, it is much higher in AKI3 as compared to AKI0. As the surge severity increases, the MA, the maximum amplitude of clot formation, actually increases till surge 3, but starts worsening beyond that. And this is very interesting. So beyond a particular threshold, if there is further inflammation, you actually start declination of the strength of the clot formation. Enough has been talked about von Willebrand factor and Adams 13 previously. This paper, which is again published very recently last month, showed that it is the imbalance of von Willebrand factor to Adams 13 ratio, which is associated with adverse outcomes and bleeding in patients with acute liver failure. So not only are the bleeding complications higher, but even survival is affected. Patients who died or underwent transplantation had a higher von Willebrand factor levels, lower Adam 13 activity, but similar thrombin generation and a similar proportion of patients with severe hypofibrinolysis. Patients with bleeding had higher von Willebrand factor levels and lower Adam 13 activity, but similar thrombin generation and clot lysis as compared to those without bleeding. And therefore, this paper has concluded once again that bleeding in acute liver failure relates more to systemic inflammation than a primary coagulopathy. And therefore, just correcting coagulopathy or achieving hemostasis in patients who are actively bleeding may not really impact the outcomes in a major way, because a very small proportion of patients with bleed will die because of the bleeding, but they usually die because of the systemic inflammation, multi-organ dysfunction, and intracranial hypertension. So to conclude, my dear friends, despite a deranged INR, acute liver failure is characterized by rebalanced hemostasis and bleeding is distinctly uncommon. Routine correction of coagulopathy does not benefit patients, but may actually cause harm because of TRALI, TACO, and worsening SIRS or liver failure due to microplatelets, particles, and microthrombi formation. Correction of coagulation is indicated prior to insertion of ICP monitors or in the presence of significant hemorrhage. The threshold for correction may be lower in patients with acute kidney injury or severe inflammation, sepsis. Bleeding in ALF patients relates more to systemic inflammation than a primary coagulopathy and is therefore associated with worse outcomes, and control of bleeding may not result in better outcomes. Thank you very much for a patient hearing.